we believe that it's very important to bring the different stakeholders together to a table. Education providers, employers, politicians, parents, and especially the young people, to think and work together on finding the right answers to these challenges. And that's exactly what we from the Goethe-Institut, together with the Mercator Foundation, are doing with StartNet. We aim at improving the transition for young people from education to work by engaging all relevant stakeholders, by building bridges of opportunities through pilot actions in southern Italy, and by encouraging communities of shared practice, mutual learning, and collaboration across Europe. And that's exactly why we're gathered here today in this round, in this European network gathering, bringing together 17 partners from 10 countries across Europe that are committed to exchanging, collaborating across borders and sectors, and this is really fantastic. And now, with great pleasure, I again welcome Andreas Schleicher. Mr. Schleicher, we are incredibly happy that you agreed to join us today and to kind of kick us off into the discussion of the afternoon. You're Director of Education and Skills at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, and you serve as Special Advisor on Education Policy to the Secretary General. You are a distinguished expert in the field of education, the future of skills, and their link to the labor market. For more than 20 years, you have been working closely with policymakers and educational leaders to improve the educational landscape, making it more future-proof and innovative. During this time, you also initiated the well-known program for international student assessment, PISA, which you are still overseeing today. And I must say, I still remember the shockwaves that went through Germany at the time when the PISA-Studie, as it's called in German, came up, and we were really shaken. It really shook the educational scene. And finally, I'm also delighted to know, if I'm informed correctly, that the Goethe-Institut is no stranger to you. I believe that you know the Goethe-Institut in Rome, which you visited several times during for the PISA study. So this also is absolutely fantastic for us. I couldn't imagine anybody more apt to be with us today to set the scene for our discussion. And we are really now looking forward to your presentation on transitioning into an uncertain future. After your presentation, we'll have Q&A, and then afterwards we'll break into small groups to further reflect on and discuss the issues that are at hand, develop them further, and hopefully come up even with maybe concrete ideas and concrete actions to follow up on. This session, as was said, will be recorded, and we'll gladly share the highlights and outcomes as a follow-up after the symposium. And so thank you again, vielen Dank, Mr. Schleicher, for taking the time, for being here with us, and the floor is all yours now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to StartNet. And let me sort of just offer two thoughts up front. You know, you cannot possibly think about the future of work separately from the future of skills. And the future of skills is the future of work. Second thought really is, don't think about transitions when people make transitions. I think that's the mistake that we often make. You know, oh yeah, now people are graduating, let's give them good career advice, tell them about, you know, the future of work. The most important career decisions you make in primary school, maybe before, you know, that's when you decide, I'm going to take school seriously. These are the subjects I'm getting interested in. These are the teachers, you know, who support me well, who understand my dreams, my passions, my ideas for the future, who I am, who I want to become. So this is really, I think, very essential. The foundations are laid very early on, and we need to prepare for transitions. Now, if you can't swim, you know, you don't want to end up in the sea in the transition. And I think those two things are very important. Let me just, you know, highlight this with a few data elements, and I'm going to share my screen. I hope that is possible here. Yeah, there we are. So when I talk about transitioning of the future, the context obviously is increasingly uncertain. volatile and complex environment. Young people see that jobs for which they have been preparing are disappearing. New ones are being created where they feel they may not have the attitudes, the dispositions, the skills, the knowledge. We have new forms of work emerging. We have labor markets rapidly polarizing. Those with the right set of skills never had the kind of opportunities they have today, whereas those without strong foundations really, really struggled. I think those are the kind of contextual environments in which we are, and they shape what you see on the economic side. Platforms drive the reorganization of companies, of firms. You can have very few people and have a vast global footprint. The most successful companies these days are not created by a big industry. They are created by a big idea. They have the product before they have the money. Now, that's the kind of philosophy on which the economy is built. So if you have the right skills, technology can be an amazing accelerator and an amazing amplifier. You no longer know who's the customer and who's the consumer and who's the business. Peer-to-peer markets are really changing everything. You do not need these very complex structures around you to sell products or buy things. You can actually, take a lot of ownership of this. Then even governments start to work on that platform kind of basis. So this is a reality around us that shapes the future of work. And now you would expect me to talk about things like artificial intelligence. I will actually not. I think artificial intelligence is just, again, a big amplifier, a big magnifier, but not a magic power. It's going to be, amplifying good ideas in good practice in the same way it amplifies bad ideas in bad practice. It just gives us more power. But it's not going to and it makes the kind of things that are easy to teach and easy to test less relevant. Those are precisely the kind of things that are easy to digitize, to automate. That is a very, very important lesson from this. We need to stop educating second-class robots, people who are just good at repeating what we tell them, and need to ask ourselves more carefully, what does it mean to be human in a world of artificial intelligence? How do we complement, not substitute the artificial intelligence we created in our computers now? And you can see actually a very nice relationship between skills and automation around us. On the vertical axis, I show you the skills that we measured in our survey of adult skills in the workforce. And on the horizontal axis, the risk of automation of jobs. Basically, it's a measure of the likelihood to which certain occupational categories will disappear. And you can line up countries pretty well. There are some exceptions to this. Countries like Japan, Germany, the Slovak Republic, Lithuania are more vulnerable to automation than what you expect from the relatively high skill base. And that's basically the industrial structure of these countries. But, when you discount for that, more or less, skills and automation go hand in hand. Now, the best protection against, digitalization, the negative outcomes of digitalization, is actually to have a good skill base in the population. And this, again, shows you why the future of work and the future of skills are so closely interrelated. Now, this will be quite intuitive to people. People know that skills are important, but I want to show you, how young people think about it. In our PISA study, we ask 15-year-olds, what do you want to do in your life? What kind of careers, what kind of jobs do you aspire to? And what is remarkable is that you have a third, sometimes 40%, sometimes 50% of 15-year-olds who aspire to jobs that with almost certainty won't exist when they graduate. That is, and it's particularly more pronounced even among students from disadvantaged backgrounds, looking for jobs that will more likely not exist. So what this really tells you is that young people who have lived through many years of schooling, we're talking about 15-year-olds, actually don't have much of a sense of the world of work. And you can try to deal with this when they graduate and give them career advice and all of those things, but you haven't built the foundations. Now, if at age 15 people do not see the world around them and the potential of the world, you will face great risks, and that's really what we have. The more troubling picture is that, career aspirations of people have become even more myopic. We started to measure this in 2000, and now we have 2018, and you can see among girls, over half of 15-year-old girls aspire to just 10 of hundreds of occupations. Now, among boys, it looks a little better, but it also, career concentration has become worse also there. Think about that paradox. The world of work has become more diverse, more interesting, more, more multifaceted. And at the same time, the expectations of young people have become more narrow, more concentrated, more myopic. Because, expectations of young people are not framed by their learning. They're often framed by what they see in television and summer. Actually, this is where the trouble really starts. There is a growing misalignment between the future of work and the aspirations of young people, particularly among girls, but also, among girls. The same trend going into the same direction. A richer, more diverse world, less kind of perspectives among young people about this world. And what is very clear, you cannot be what you cannot see. Now, I think the kind of world that people see around themselves is very influential on where you're going to invest your effort. If you can't see, have never met a scientist, why would you engage yourself in the world of science? And the driving forces behind all of this are actually very clear. Routine tasks disappear. I already mentioned that. Technology-intensive tasks are rising in importance. You put the two things together, and there you see the future of work. Some people have called this all a race between, humans and technology. Before, the first industrial revolution, neither mattered. Then we built our traditional education systems. Now the digital revolution hits, putting everything into question again, and we have again, the kind of technology advancing over the capacities of humans. But that's the kind of maybe what many people perceive to be the negative aspects of digitalization. Things, technology, robots taking something away from you. But I encourage you to look at this chart. What's actually really interesting, there's actually digital intensive industries are much better at extracting value from the skills of people. Now, if you work in a digital intensive industry, you are getting better paid for your work because your industry is going to use your skills in a much more effective way. And this is not just about, digital literacy and technology skills. It's actually not any more than about numeracy, management skills, self-organization skills, problem-solving skills, readiness to learn, to unlearn, to relearn. All of those kind of skills have the same pattern. Actually, a digitally intensive kind of environment is helping us better to turn, better skills into better jobs and better lives. There's another angle to this, also interesting. You can see if you work in a digital intensive industry, you're more likely to learn from co-workers. You're much more likely to learn by doing, and you're much more likely to keep yourself up to date. Now, the digital world keeps us learning, keeps us growing. And that is so important. Now, that's why, I would not think we should look at this as a kind of human versus technology, but we should more look at these interactions. Now, how do we actually get people ready for the digital world and then give them opportunities where they can actually deploy their skills much more effectively than in traditional workplaces? But that brings me to the question, how well are we prepared for the digital world? Now, if I look at older people, 55 to 65-year-olds, it doesn't look particularly good. Now, you have countries like the United States or New Zealand, where you can see 1 in 5 older workers are, capable of solving digital problems, but in most countries, it's just 1 in 10. Many people simply miss the boat. Technology has passed them by. And, you may not believe those numbers because the people around you probably are much better. But actually, if you just dare to go out on the street, survey people, this is the data that you found because we found them in very large surveys. We gave this test to people, and that's basically the result that we found. Now you will tell me, well, among the younger generation, that's all resolved. Young people are digital natives. But the fact that you're born in the digital world doesn't mean that you are actually digitally competent. And that's, I think, a message that hasn't made it through yet. When we actually do that same test among 25 to 34-year-olds, you can see, yes, the bars get longer. But you can see also there, only about every second young person you meet on the street actually has the digital problem solving skills you need today, not tomorrow. That's, I think, the reality. And also the rank order of countries had changed. The United States used to be doing very well, and now it's just about the average. You can look at a country like Singapore. They used to be at the very bottom of the international league table because in the past skill supply was very poor, and now together with Finland and Sweden they've made it to the frontier. So that's also very important. Everybody's got better, but some countries are getting better much faster than others. That's, I think, really, really the context that we need to take in place. And that brings me again, to this race between education and technology. First industrial revolution, neither technology or education mattered most for the vast amount of people. Then, the industrial revolution moved technology ahead of the skills of people and left people badly behind, causing huge amount of social pain. Again, that's when we made our, societies compatible with the norms of industrial thinking, and it worked for a long time. The schools that we have today actually served a good purpose for many years, making people compatible with the ideas and working of the industrial society. But then, nothing much happened, and now we have the digital revolution, and you can see exactly the same pattern. You have young people graduating from university and having a hard time finding a good job. And at the very same time, you have employers telling you, we cannot find the people with the skills we need. That's, leading us into the same kind of trap. And the COVID pandemic has not created any of this. It's just, once again, accelerated this. It's got out of the way many of the barriers, made those kind of changes more apparent, but it left us with the same question. How do we actually educate for a future of work that will look very different? I will bring you back once more to the PISA assessment. We looked at something that we call the growth mindset of young people. Now, to what extent do you believe that you actually, you own your success, as opposed to, success is about inherited intelligence and things you can't do anything about. And what's so amazing here, when you look at growth mindset on the vertical axis, on the horizontal axis, and student learning outcomes on the vertical axis on the PISA test, you can see how countries line up. Now you can see a country like Estonia, number 1 in the OECD on PISA, also number 1 on growth mindset, and a country like Indonesia where students struggle on both sides. So you can really see how in the world in which we live now, mindsets are as predictive for your success in the academic world as the kind of knowledge that you have learned. Very, very important finding in the future of work. Mindsets are going to matter a lot, and it's cognitive skills, it's social emotional skills, but it's also about mindsets. And actually, when we looked at this in the PISA context, these are 15-year-olds, of course, we also found that where students had more of a growth mindset, they were more likely to master difficult tasks. They had a greater sense of self-efficacy. They were less afraid of failure. What could be more important today in this volatile, complex world? You want people to, to be entrepreneurial, to be creative. And if you want to be creative, you have to, experiment. If you experiment, you will take risks. If you take risks, you will make mistakes. If our systems are making people afraid of mistakes, we're not going to see people are very creative and entrepreneurial. You can see sort of how growth mindset really plays into this. So in conclusion, if you ask me, what are the most important knowledge and skills today, attitudes and values, is our capacity to create new value, to imagine, to build. Now that's what artificial intelligence is not yet very good at. It's very good at, recognizing patterns and extrapolating from it, but not really, to think around the corner, to think beyond the current paradigms. Our capacity to navigate ambiguity, to manage and resolve tensions and dilemmas. And then very importantly, agency, no? Our capacity to mobilize cognitive, social, and emotional resources. Now, in life, we know many answers. We also can do many things, but still we miss out on many opportunities to do something because we are not able to get our act together, no? To integrate our cognitive, social, and emotional resources to do something. So those three aspects is what we call really as the most transformative competences at the OECD. And we think about, education today, not about, teaching you something, but about providing you with that inner compass that helps, find orientation, build your way, learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that brings me to the last few thoughts. Again, we used to learn to do the work, and suddenly learning has become the work. In the past, we went to school, to university, we get our job, and then we retire. Today, the early years have become significantly more important. In a way, I would say school was the education of the 20th century. Early childhood education is about the education of the 21st century. Why do I say this? Because we know from research that many of the skills that are most valued for the future of work are built in the earliest years. If you think about, capabilities like curiosity or courage or empathy or leadership, later in life, they're very hard to change. They become, things like personality traits. Early in life, they are skills. We can teach them, we can educate them, we can build them. Yeah, that's very, very important. I think the early years are going to become much more important. And then, working and learning will be one and the same. The good workplaces are good places of learning. The institutions can support you, but I think with micro-credentialing and so on, degrees and qualifications will become less and less relevant. I think people are going to find a way around it, and it's going to be harder and harder for universities to extract the kind of monopoly rents they actually charge young people today. Nobody's going to pay in the future $50,000 for a university degree. No, I don't think there's any question about that. No. But the reality is that actually lifelong learning is so easy to talk about, but the reality looks quite poor. You can see actually people who have made it in initial education continue to learn, whereas people who did not actually continue to lose out. Most of the learning that happens throughout the lives of people tends to amplify, not moderate, initial inequalities. I think we have to rethink places of working very significantly now. We have to think more carefully about firms at learning environments. You learn at the job, but then, how do you decide, how to divide up the cost for this between the individuals, the employers, the governments? And I don't think many countries have found good answers to this. Otherwise, we would see a lot more learning to this. Who sets the standards? What is good learning? How do we recognize the skills that are being acquired? Why would you study when your employer doesn't translate this into a better job or better pay? I think those are questions that are very, very important for us to answer, to deal with the future of work and future of skills all at the same time. How do we certify skills in a digital world? Now, once again, I don't think degrees and qualifications will have much of a future. The future is not going to reward you where you studied and for how long and what courses you did. The future is going to value you for what you can actually do. So certification, micro-credentialing will become much more powerful in figuring out, where are your strengths and weaknesses and giving you feedback on how you can become better at this. This is very, very important. The biggest question, I believe, is really, how do we deal with people who are not, in a great employment situation? For the unemployed, you can say, government should pick up the cost. There are a lot of schemes and devices available for this. But that's, when people have fallen through the cracks, it's far too late. And you can see on the chart that I presented to you before, you usually don't reach those people. The last thing on their mind is actually to do more training, more skill-based learning. They, see, the downsides of that much more clearly. But importantly, how do we deal with people at risk of losing their job? I don't know, but will we see truck drivers in 15 years' time? Probably not. What do we do with those people in those jobs today, not in 15 years' time? How do we invest in people? How do we convince people themselves their jobs may be at risk. Now is the time to invest in the next job. How do we deal with people who want to change jobs? How do we deal with people who are not formally employed, like the gig economy? I think those are really important questions to answer. And then, there's going to be big governance challenges. Now we get new forms of work, and sometimes it means it's harder to raise taxes from them. Now, we have rapidly changing demographics. I talk about the importance of skills, but the reality is we are spending more on people who are old and actually invest less in our future. Now that's the bitter reality. Now we have decentralized information flows. Who's going to manage all of this? Link between education, formal education, and jobs is weakening. I said this already. So that means it's harder for governments to steer this. Now the interaction between individuals and jobs is becoming more prominent. So, lots of hard questions to think about. But, once again, think about the kind of future of skills and the future of jobs as two sides of the same coin. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Mr. Schleicher, many thanks for this truly dense and still concise presentation. I think it really responded very well to the interest and the expectations of the StartNet partners. I will give some time to the partners to collect their thoughts, to ask you questions directly, taking the floor by showing the hands raising function or in the chat. But I would like to come already in with one question regarding your presentation. You mentioned the technological change, the drivers of automation, digitalization, what it means for skills, mindsets, education, lifelong learning. And then there's a prism you can look through that, which is the stakeholders. And you mentioned the government, the industry. Now in the StartNet network, you have educational providers, NGOs, foundations, local regional actors that team up to work on young people's transition. They are not shaping themselves the curricula, but they are working with them or working around them. How do you see such educational stakeholders? What can they do about it in this bigger picture on education? Where do you see their specific potential to be positive drivers and contributors to a change that is needed?
I think, those stakeholders will be the future learning system. I actually believe, traditional education providers will lose in relevance, lose in importance. Yes, they will still offer, a lot of formal learning that is required, but much of the learning already today happens outside institutions. We just do not very well support it, and we do not very well recognize it, and we do not very well structure this. This is what we need to figure out. If you ask yourself, where did you learn what you know today? Probably you will conclude some of this I learned at university or in school, but a lot you actually learn outside school. But we need to become better to structure this, to recognize, to credentialize this. And that will happen by social stakeholders. And that's why I also think, good curricula are designed, co-created by stakeholders and civil society, including learners. I think it's almost amazing that the only people who are rarely involved in the design of, the what question are the people who are directly affected, and then some people say, oh, you can't ask students. Actually, there are some countries, New Zealand, Flanders and Belgium, where they ask 5-year-olds about learning in kindergarten, and they get actually very good and very interesting answers. So I think the kind of stakeholder ecosystem will be the future lifelong learning environment. And if stakeholders do not get their act together, there will be no lifelong learning. There will be continued kind of formal training.
Thanks, Mr. Schleicher. Let's give the floor to one of those stakeholders. I ask Paolo Nardi from Cometa Formazione in Northern Italy to ask your question.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Mr. Schleicher. Inspiring as usual. I would like to discuss about this topic for 3 hours, but we don't have time. I have some quick questions. You showed us a ranking of countries based on digital skills in youth. I was wondering if you have any idea on methods, on, let's say, the reasons why some countries are quite better than others. The second question, similar, you also mentioned the importance of growth mindsets. we are conducting a research on the textile and tourism sector in 5 European countries with very, very similar results, actually. So I was also wondering, did you study or are you doing research on what are the approaches encouraging the development of these growth mindset, the practices? And then just a final question, if you have time, about, you just mentioned very, very quickly this idea of micro-credentials, but I would like to understand better your vision on that. Thanks.
Yeah, you know, on the ranking why some countries are better, the context is, the answer is very complex. Like, it's often not digital skills themselves. It's often, you know, underlying cognitive skills that drives that. You know, it's like digital literacy is only to a small part a technological competency. It's your capacity, you know, to navigate ambiguity, to navigate, you know, complex information structures, to distinguish fact from opinion. All of those kinds of things really matter a lot for this. And where countries are doing well in helping students, you know, to think like a scientist, to think like a philosopher, to think like a mathematician, you know, I think you're going to see good digital skills as well. So I would actually argue that the best digital skills you develop by helping people to think for themselves and work with others. Now, I think really that's, it is not about, you know, teaching coding very early in primary school. That can be one of the tools, but it shouldn't become an end in itself. It's really, you know, thinking and problem solving skills that really matter for this ranking. That's why, you know, you see Singapore, Finland, and Sweden really come out on top. Growth mindset. You know, actually, we can learn a lot from kindergarten. You know, the great thing is that we are all born with a growth mindset. Now, that is so interesting. You know, if you have a 3-year-old son or daughter, you know, they're going to question everything you do. They're going to experiment with everything that gets into their way. They're going to sort of put everything to the test. And unfortunately, you know, the more we go through formal education and training, the more we lose some of those abilities. There are always people around who tell you you're just not bright enough to learn that. And that's, you know, creating that fixed mindset. I can't do things about it. So I think it's very much about learning environments that give people room to experiment, to build agency, to actually, you know, learn that self-efficacy, also to struggle. Now, sometimes we make life too easy for young people. We say, oh, well, you didn't do so well here, I'm going to give you an easier task. No, actually not. You know, I think this kind of struggling with difficulties and getting good support, that is what creates your growth mindset. It's not, you know, solving the kind of easy tasks. So I think it's not so difficult to develop it. And the fact that you can see so much cross-country variation really shows you it's not a cultural issue. It's really an educational agenda, not to create that environment. On the micro-credentials, all what I mean by that is simply that we recognize skills on a much more granular level. Rather than, you know, asking you to study for 4 years in some institutions and being locked into that environment, and then at the end, you know, you get a beautiful certificate, which really is not much more than the receipt for the tuition you pay. You actually reward people for every little step they do. You know, you actually find ways, you know, you learn something here, we're going to kind of mark that there. Micro-credential is basically about giving people more ownership over what they learn, how they learn, where they learn, and when they learn. There are some very good examples in the technology industry already available today, but, you know, there's no reason why we can't generalize from that.
And we're moving now from Italy to Spain. We have another question from Raúl Pérez from Fundación Secretariado Gitano, working a lot with Roma young people in Spain.
Thank you, Jan. Yeah, I'm from Fundación Secretariado Gitano. We work especially with Roma people to promote the social inclusion, especially through employment and education programs. And I felt quite aligned with the words from Mr. Schleicher. Our analysis goes in the same direction regarding the digitalization, and we are especially concerned about this polarization you mentioned, and because most of the beneficiaries of our programs don't achieve to have the compulsory education. For example, only 17% of Roma people in Spain have the compulsory education, which is amazingly low. Only an example, but of course they are socially, to some extent, socially excluded. So I would like to know if you would have some recommendations for the social civil organizations on these matters. How to address the polarization?
Yeah.
Sorry.
We actually have an interesting program at the OECD to look at education of minorities, but I would encourage you to think about this more generally. I think the problem that we have in education, that we have a one-size-fits-all model that is actually designed around the needs of people who succeed in those systems. And then we are surprised that, not just Roma people, but lots of people fall through the cracks. Actually, Spain is a good example. How many people repeat a school year? How many people actually drop out? And that is not to do with money or not being able to afford school. It is about, the loss of relevance, or the fact that schools do not reach people in their learning styles and learning needs. And I think the answer to this is really about, making learning more relevant and bringing learners more to the different needs of learners. Easy to say, very hard to do, but I think digitalization is one of the tools that we can use today to achieve this. Now, technology can actually be very good to understand and help teachers understand how different learners learn differently and embrace that diversity with more, granularity. But ultimately, it's also about, giving young people, helping them to develop their dreams and passions and supporting them. I think if we just, sell schools to people to get a degree, you will always lose a lot of people who do not see that from, if you come from a wealthy background, probably your parents will tell you, well, even what you learn in school may not be so meaningful. You just have to do it so that you get your degree and then you have a wonderful life. If you come from a disadvantaged background, you have to motivate yourself, and that often is absent. And I think that's where we have to work on. And I think it's crucially important. If you come from a privileged background, you'll always find open doors in life. There's always be ways for you to succeed. If you come from a disadvantaged background, actually, there is just one single door in your life, one card you can play, and that is a great teacher and a great school. You miss that boat, you're not going to find your way back. For most people, at least, that's what the statistics show. And so I think actually we need to bring education much closer to the different needs of different learners.
Thanks, Mr. Schleicher. And we're going back to Italy, to Angela Bartolomei at the Goethe-Institut in Rome.
Hello to everybody. Thanks. Yes, we are going back to Italy. We're going to South Italy this time. So I'm part of the StartNet project in Southern Italy. And we are very much working with companies, or no, to say it better, we try to work with companies, and often see that it is quite difficult because companies are not so collaborative in early career guidance. And I was wondering whether you have some statistics or something about how companies behave. Are they aware of which kind of skills they will need within the next 10, 15 years, and how innovative they are, and what they are doing to help young people to learn these skills? And
actually, I think we have to be very realistic here. Companies can tell you what skills they use today, but I don't think they have much of an idea of what they need tomorrow. That's the reality, and that's true for all of us. I think the best you can do is actually give young people a broad understanding of the range of skills that could be relevant. And, don't rely so much on just the companies as a structure. Rely on the people who work in that company. I give you an example. I worked in England with a charity, Education and Employers, it's called. And once they posted an ad on the internet, who is willing to spend 2 hours per month to explain to children in primary school their own job? And then we expected, oh, well, we get 500 or 1,000 people, and then we can do a nice project to give young people a better idea of, how work really looks like. We got over 40,000 volunteers. We could create which really shows how much, you can knock on a lot of doors in companies, but get over. But the moment you ask actually civil society to play a role in education, you get a lot of volunteers. And the impact of that program has been absolutely amazing. many young people for the first time see the breadth of occupations that is actually around them. If you come from a disadvantaged background, you know what your mother does, your father does, maybe your kind of friends, and that maybe all about the same kind of jobs. I remember the chart I showed you. 10 jobs get mentioned on average by the 50% of girls. That is the result. So, what the best you can do today is not, to dream up what you think about the future of work, but to give people a really good understanding how do different occupations use different skills, and then, let them, evolve. And we cannot predict the future. What we have to become better at is to anticipate alternative futures and to prepare ourselves for different scenarios. And if we do that well, I think we will be also well prepared for the future that eventually arrives. If we just, bet on one horse, one future that looks very likely today, the future will always surprise us.
In your example, Mr. Schleicher, you mentioned something that is very much at the core of StartNet, which is the collective impact. Civil society, companies, education providers really joining forces and working for young people's transition together. But I would like to mention another question in the chat coming from Gesa Spätling in Brussels. Mr. Schleicher, you said you cannot be what you cannot see. How can we systematically show youngsters what options they have without scaring them off? Whose responsibility is that?
Well, the example that I just mentioned from England is exactly doing that. Bringing people from the world of work, from life into schools. And they're doing an amazing job in explaining, things that students often, do not understand from their teachers. We do that far too rarely. Schools are good in keeping students inside and the rest of the world outside. Now, the more bridges we build, the better we will succeed with this. When we had our first exhibition where this was taking place, I was asking a girl, how was it? Did you really like it? And she'd said to me, oh, it was amazing. I didn't know that girls could become electricians. It really should. And this was not, somewhere in the rural area. This was in London. You can see how limited the kind of view of the world of many people is, because that's the stereotypes that get promoted, by the media everywhere. So the best, anti-vaccine or the best vaccine is, to show people how the world looks like, how different people work. I could tell you, there was a policeman who showed, how they do forensic science. And he was surrounded by a crowd of young people who would have never, gone to a science class on voluntarily. So actually, I think, it's actually, you might be interested. There's a school branch or a group of like 40 schools in Brazil and South America. They have a very interesting principle. They have basically, every student has a tutor, but the only thing the tutor is not allowed to do is to teach the student. So all of the teaching comes from people from, the world of work. If you learn about physics, you learn with a car mechanic. If you learn about, biology, you're going to learn from a nurse or whatever. And actually, the tutor is helping people to learn and to study, but the information all comes. And what is quite amazing, when those students graduate eventually, they do better on the Brazilian national test than students who have done nothing else and study for the national test. So it really is a very powerful way of learning and at the same time experiencing reality around you.
Mr. Schleicher, we soon have to let you go, but the last example is really touching on a topic that many of our partners are working on, which is career guidance, orientation. And you have showed how many opportunities there are out there, how many stakeholders, how many challenges at the same time. So it seems just obvious how challenging orientation is becoming for the individual. How do you see successful career guidance orientation starting from an early age and really empowering, guiding the young people through that pathway?
Yeah, first of all, again, I think the most effective career guidance you do in primary school, you're not going to do when people graduate. That's actually a very common mistake that we see often. You basically help people who struggle to find a way, but actually the most powerful guidance to give people very early on. That's the first thing. Second thing is, teachers and school psychologists often are not the best people to do this work. They are landed with this because nobody else does that. But actually the best people to talk about careers are the people who are in those careers. And I think that's, again, where the integration of the world of work and learning is very powerful. Some countries do that with, internship and, work-based learning. I think it's a great way of doing, but it's very expensive and it's very difficult to get real employer engagement. The easier way is simply to get more people into schools who can talk to people about, their work, what they find interesting, what they find, troubling, and give young people good experiences. So do it early, do it by bringing outside expertise into schools, internships and job shadowing and so on. Often it's not done well enough to be really of positive. It's sort of something, I have to ask a friend for my child to get some work experience. I really think, if you want to do that well in a structure, you can see in Switzerland and Germany, there's some really good Netherlands countries doing that well, but mostly I think the most effective way is really to open school doors more, to make school more of a kind of social experience for young people. And but once again, you'd achieve very little at the point when people graduate, really.
Thank you so much, Mr. Schleicher. I think we could continue much longer to discuss on that and many other dimensions of the topic. I think we have a small question to know more about the format in England, coming from Austria, Andrea Fuchs from the Koordinierungsstelle Tirol. Maybe you or your office, you can also share more information.
Yeah, absolutely.
Regarding that example.
It's actually very easy to replicate. It's basically a website where basically schools register their interest, the kind of careers they want to show to students, and then people indicate what they're good at and what they want to explain, and then there's a matching process. Very, very simple. Actually, New Zealand has imported that same system. I'll be happy to connect you.
Thank you so much. And before we go in the group works and really working on the input you have been giving us now, I would hand over back again to Elke Kaschl-Moni for some thank you words and some outlook.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Andreas Schleicher. This was highly fascinating, and I think a lot of food for thought now for the discussions in the breakout sessions. It will definitely resonate with us. I took a lot of notes, like a lot of the catchphrases you gave to us: learn, unlearn, relearn, growth mindset, anticipate alternative futures, and so on. So thank you very much. We'll be delighted to get back to you, also to communicate outcomes of this symposium to you, European good practices, maybe potential new ideas. So we would love to and be committed to staying in touch. This was extremely valuable for us. And I would like to say, as we say in German, herzlichen Dank und auf Wiedersehen. Hope to stay in touch and hope to see you soon. Thank you for having joined us.
Thanks so much. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.